On February 14th, 2022, a deaf girl stood up in a hearing room and destroyed 12 careers with one single sentence that nobody in that fluorescent-lit chamber saw coming at all. She had not spoken a single word in 3 years inside Lowell Correctional Institution in Florida. 5 armed guards placed their badges on the table before she even finished talking, because they finally understood she heard everything. But to understand why grown men with guns surrendered to a girl who weighed less than a German shepherd, we need to rewind 1,096 days back to a cell that smelled like bleach and blood. This is the story of how silence became the most devastating weapon inside the most dangerous women's prison in Florida. Before we go deeper, I need you to answer one question honestly in the comments below this video right now. When was the last time you ignored someone because you assumed they had absolutely nothing important to say to you? If this story changes how you answer that question, then subscribe, because these are the stories that rewire how you see the world around you and the invisible people standing right next to you every single day. Rachel Munoz arrived at Lowell Correctional Institution on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2019, wearing shackles that were too big for her wrists. She was 22 years old and weighed 43 kilograms, which made her lighter than the laundry bags inmates dragged across the yard. When the intake officer wrote her disability code on a form and never assigned a permanent sign language interpreter to her housing unit, Block D held 114 women, and exactly 0 of them knew American Sign Language or cared to learn it. Rachel carried her bedroll down the corridor, and every pair of eyes measured her like predators sizing up something small and slow. The fluorescent lights buzzed at a frequency she could not hear, but she could feel them vibrating through the concrete beneath her feet. A woman with tattooed forearms and a shaved head watched her from the second-tier railing without blinking even once during the walk. Rachel did not know that woman was Darlene Craig, and that Darlene had already decided what Rachel would become inside these walls. By the time Rachel found her assigned bunk, her hands were trembling so hard she could not unroll the thin mattress pad alone. Darlene Mama Craig ran Block D the way a feudal lord runs a village, and the guards were happy to let her do it. She kept order, and order meant the corrections officers could sit in the booth and scroll their phones during the overnight shift instead of walking rounds. In exchange, Darlene got privileges, and the biggest privilege was choosing who served her and her crew of 3 loyal soldiers. Krista was the muscle with shoulders wide enough to block a doorway, and fists that had already broken 2 inmates' jaws this calendar year alone. Jolene was the intelligence gatherer, who knew every whisper, every debt, and every secret on the block before breakfast was even served each morning. Paige was the newest member, 20 years old, desperate to prove loyalty and willing to do whatever Darlene asked without hesitation or moral pause. Within 72 hours of Rachel's arrival, Darlene pointed at her across the cafeteria and said 2 words to Krista, "Bring her." Rachel did not hear the words, but she saw Krista's shadow fall over her tray and felt the hand close around her arm. The grip left 5 bruises shaped like fingerprints, and those bruises would not be the last to decorate her skin like terrible jewelry. The first beating happened on a Thursday night, when the only guard on duty was Officer Marcus Brady, who was 34 years old and completely indifferent to suffering. Darlene wanted her jumpsuit washed by morning, and Rachel had not understood the command because nobody signed it to her. Paige delivered the punishment with a sock filled with a combination lock, swinging it into Rachel's ribs, while Krista held her mouth shut. Rachel hit the concrete floor and tasted iron and felt something crack along her left side, like a branch snapping under heavy snow. Brady walked past the cell. 14 minutes later, saw Rachel curled on the floor and wrote in his report, "Inmate Munoz fell from bunk, no treatment needed." He did not crouch down or check her pupils or ask if she was okay, because asking required effort, and effort was not in his job description. The next morning, Rachel washed Darlene's jumpsuit with one hand, because lifting her left arm sent lightning bolts of white pain through her cracked rib cage. She learned the first rule of Block D that week, and the rule was simple: you obey or you bleed, and nobody is coming to help. But Rachel also learned something else that week, something Darlene and Brady and the entire system had not accounted for at all. She learned that people say extraordinary things when they believe nobody in the room can understand a single word they are speaking. Brady leaned against the cell bars one night, talking to another officer about the contraband pipeline that ran through the kitchen loading dock every Wednesday. He named suppliers, he named prices. He named the lieutenant who signed off on falsified inventory reports, and he laughed while doing it. Rachel sat 3 feet away on her bunk staring at the wall, and Brady glanced at her and said to his colleague, "Relax, she is deaf as a post." Those 6 words would eventually cost him 7 years in a federal penitentiary, but on that night, they just hung in the stale air. Rachel could not hear them, but she had already begun to notice something about the way mouths moved when people formed certain shapes. She watched lips the way a starving person watches someone eat, memorizing every movement, every pattern, every tiny flicker of tongue against teeth. It was not yet understanding, but it was the seed of something that would grow into the most dangerous skill in Lowell Correctional Institution. And nobody, not Darlene, not Brady, not even Rachel herself, knew yet what that seed would become when it finally broke through the soil. 6 months into her sentence, Rachel discovered the prison library and the woman who would change everything about how this story ends forever. Gloria Vines was 63 years old with arthritic fingers and silver hair, and she was serving year 8 of a 12-year sentence for Medicare fraud. Before prison, she had been a speech-language pathologist in Jacksonville, helping children who could not speak find their voices for over 30 years. She saw Rachel hiding between the shelves one afternoon, pressing a book against her chest like a shield against the entire world outside those pages. Gloria did not speak to her that day or the next day or the day after that, because Gloria understood that trust is not requested, but earned. On the 4th day, she simply placed a picture book on the table open to a page showing a mouth forming the letter M with a small mirror beside it. Rachel stared at the mirror, Maikarikis then at the page, then at Gloria, who slowly exaggerated the shape of her lips around that single consonant sound. Something shifted behind Rachel's eyes, like a locked door receiving its first tentative knock from the other side after years of absolute silence. Gloria would later tell the federal investigators that she knew in that exact moment she was looking at someone who had been screaming inside for 22 years without making a single sound. Their sessions began the following week, disguised as library cleaning duty 20 minutes every Tuesday and Thursday, while the block was at recreation yard time. Gloria would place Rachel's fingertips against her own throat so Rachel could feel the vibration that each different letter created beneath the skin. The letter M hummed like a small engine, and Rachel pressed harder, trying to memorize the frequency the way a musician memorizes a note by touch alone. The letter S was a hiss that Rachel could feel as air against her palm, and she practiced it silently in her bunk every single night. Nobody noticed because nobody watched Rachel, and that invisibility, which had been her curse, was now becoming her greatest strategic advantage in the entire facility. Darlene still sent Krista to collect Rachel's dinner tray 3 nights a week, and Rachel still handed it over without protest or resistance of any kind. Brady still talked freely in front of her about shipments, about bribes, about the time Lieutenant Karen Drake shredded a grievance report filed by an inmate. Rachel absorbed every word through the shapes of their lips and stored them in a memory that had nothing else to hold except pain, and now this. But she told no one what she was learning because Gloria had made her promise with trembling, arthritic hands and desperate eyes to wait until the moment was exactly right. By month 9, Rachel could read lips with nearly 80% accuracy, and that changed everything about her captivity forever. She no longer sat in darkness when guards spoke because their mouths became open books she devoured with hungry eyes. Brady told another officer that Darlene received cell phones through the kitchen loading dock every second Wednesday, without fail. Lieutenant Drake discussed shredding 4 grievance reports in her office, while Rachel mopped the hallway floor just outside the door. Rachel memorized names, dates, and details the way a soldier memorizes a map before crossing into enemy territory alone. She stored each fact in mental compartments organized by person, by crime, by the exact location where each word was spoken. Gloria had taught her that lips reveal more than voices because people guard their volume but never guard their mouths. What Rachel did not yet realize was that her growing archive of secrets made her the most dangerous person in Lowell. And the most dangerous people in prison are always the ones nobody suspects of being dangerous at all. But learning to read lips was only half of what Gloria was building inside that library between dusty shelves nobody visited. The other half was sound, and sound required Rachel to do something she had never done in 22 years of living. She had to push air through vocal cords that had never once vibrated with intentional speech in her entire life. Gloria started with humming, because humming requires no precision, just vibration, just the willingness to let your throat become alive. Rachel placed both palms flat against her own neck and pushed air upward and felt nothing for the first 11 attempts. On the 12th attempt, something flickered beneath her skin like a pilot light, catching in a furnace that had been cold forever. Her eyes went wide and Gloria grabbed her wrist not to stop her, but to say, yes, that is it right there. Rachel hummed for 9 seconds, and tears ran down her face, though she made no expression whatsoever with her mouth. She had felt her own voice for the first time, and the sensation was so foreign it frightened her more than Krista's fists. The problem with learning to speak in secret inside a prison is that prisons are designed to eliminate every single secret. Cameras watched the library entrance, and Gloria had to time their sessions precisely between guard rotation and yard recall. Rachel practiced forming vowels silently in her bunk at night, pressing her fingers to her throat beneath the thin blanket. She mouthed words into her mattress so that even if someone watched, they would see nothing but a sleeping girl. But Jolene was Darlene's intelligence network, and Jolene noticed patterns the way a spider notices vibrations on silk thread. She reported to Darlene that Rachel spent unusual amounts of time in the library every Tuesday and Thursday without exception. Darlene considered this information for 2 days, then dismissed it, because what could a deaf mute possibly do in a library? That dismissal was the single greatest miscalculation Darlene Craig would make in her entire criminal career inside those walls. Remember that moment because it is the hinge on which every door in this story swings open or slams shut. 14 months in, and Rachel could form consonant clusters that would have impressed any first-year speech therapy student anywhere. She whispered her first complete word into Gloria's cupped hands in the library on a Thursday, and the word was mine. Not hello, not help, not please, but mine, as if her voice itself was a territory she was finally claiming after decades. Gloria corrected her tongue placement, gently pressing Rachel's jaw forward, showing her where teeth meet air to create meaning from nothing. Each session they added one new word, and Rachel rehearsed it 500 times before the next meeting in total silence. She could now say 12 words clearly enough for a hearing person to understand, without any repetition or guessing required. But speaking 12 words does not make you a witness. And Rachel needed to become a witness who could dismantle everything. Meanwhile, Darlene escalated because predators always escalate when they sense no resistance coming from their chosen prey at all. She began lending Rachel to other inmates for labor, which meant Rachel now cleaned 6 cells instead of just 1. And the exhaustion was crushing, but it also gave Rachel access to conversations happening across the entire block every single day. Month 22 brought the moment that transformed Rachel's mission from personal survival into something much larger and far more dangerous. She was mopping outside the medical unit, when she read Brady's lips through the window, telling the nurse something unforgivable. He said inmate Delgado did not need a rape kit because Delgado was a liar, and processing the kit meant paperwork he refused. Rachel watched his mouth form every syllable, and she felt something ignite in her chest that was not fear, but fury. Maria Delgado was 26 years old and had been assaulted by a corrections officer whose name Brady spoke casually and clearly. Rachel added that name to her mental archive alongside 37 other names, dates, and incidents she had collected so far. This was no longer about Rachel surviving long enough to reach her release date and walk through the front gate free. This was about every woman on Block D who screamed into a system designed to muffle every scream until silence won. Gloria saw the change in Rachel's eyes during their next session and whispered something Rachel read perfectly from her lips. She said, "Be careful, because anger without timing is just another way to get yourself killed in a place like this one." Year 3 began, and Gloria's body began failing faster than either of them had feared or planned for in advance. Her arthritis spread to her spine, and some mornings she could not rise from her bunk without another inmate's help. The prison transferred her to the medical housing unit, which meant their Tuesday-Thursday sessions in the library were finished completely. Rachel sat alone between the shelves that afternoon and pressed her forehead against a Bible that held her hidden notes. 47 pages of observations written in tiny letters tucked inside the binding where nobody would ever think to search. She could now speak in short sentences with a rough, halting voice that sounded like gravel dragged across wet pavement slowly. It was not beautiful speech, but it was unmistakably human and unmistakably clear enough for any commission member to understand. Gloria had given her the last instruction before the transfer, and it burned in Rachel's mind like a brand on skin. She said the State Oversight Commission visits Lowell every February, and inmates can request 5 minutes to address them directly. Rachel spent the next 4 months preparing in absolute solitude, rehearsing sentences into her mattress every night after lights out. She requested her 5 minutes before the commission through a written form that the administration approved without reading or caring. They approved it because they assumed a deaf inmate would sit there, gesture helplessly, and waste the commission's valuable time. Darlene noticed nothing because Rachel still washed clothes, still surrendered meals, still absorbed beatings without making any visible sound. Brady noticed nothing because Rachel still sat motionless when he spoke freely about crimes committed under fluorescent lights every shift. And Drake noticed nothing because Drake had stopped noticing anything except the calendar counting down to her pension date in months. The entire machine of Lowell Correctional Institution, grinding and groaning and breaking women daily, noticed absolutely nothing at all. And that was exactly what Rachel was counting on, because she had learned the most important lesson this prison taught. The people who control you will never see your power if they have already decided that you have none whatsoever. February 14th arrived the way all decisive days arrive, looking exactly like every ordinary day that came before it. Rachel woke at 5:15 when the fluorescent lights slammed on and illuminated every crack in the ceiling above. She had not slept more than 40 minutes because her body understood what her mind kept trying to deny. Today she would either destroy the machine, or the machine would finish destroying her completely and permanently forever. She dressed in her standard jumpsuit and noticed her hands were steady, which surprised her more than anything else. 3 years of beatings had taught her body to stop trembling because trembling wastes energy that survival requires. She touched her throat once beneath the collar, feeling the vocal cords that nobody knew had awakened from silence. Darlene passed her cell and barked something at Krista about breakfast, and Rachel read every word without turning around. The irony was suffocating, because Darlene was complaining about cold eggs while her entire kingdom was about to collapse. The hearing room sat at the end of the administrative corridor behind 2 locked doors that most inmates never see, where Rachel walked the hallway in ankle chains, escorted by an officer who checked his phone 4 times during the walk. The commission consisted of 7 people from Tallahassee sitting behind a long table with water bottles and folders and bored expressions. They had reviewed 11 inmate complaints already that morning, and none had produced anything worth writing down in reports. Rachel noticed 3 corrections officers standing along the back wall, including Brady, whose jaw was working gum. He leaned toward another guard, and his lips formed words Rachel caught instantly, saying, "This should be quick." Lieutenant Drake sat in the corner with a clipboard pretending to take notes, but actually watching the clock above. A state-appointed sign language interpreter sat in a folding chair near the front, waiting to translate for the deaf inmate. Rachel looked at the interpreter, then looked at the commission chair, and made a decision that would rewrite everything. The commission chair, a gray-haired woman named Patricia Holt, glanced at her file and nodded toward the interpreter. Rachel did not look at the interpreter and instead gripped the edge of the table with both small hands. Every person in that room expected gestures or silence, or confused, helpless staring from the tiny inmate before them now. Patricia Holt opened her mouth to prompt the interpreter, but stopped because Rachel was already drawing breath into her lungs. The air traveled upward through a throat that had practiced this moment 5,000 times into a mattress at night. Her lips parted, and the first sound that emerged was rough and cracked like a door opening in an abandoned house. But the words were unmistakable, and they landed on that room like a grenade, with the pin already pulled clean out. "My name is Rachel Munoz. I am not deaf to what happens inside this prison every single day." Someone on the commission dropped a pen, and the sound of it hitting the table was the loudest thing in existence. Brady stopped chewing his gum, and his face went through 4 colors in 2 seconds, starting with confusion. Rachel did not pause, because pausing meant giving them time to recover, and recovery meant counterattack against her immediately. She said Officer Marcus Brady facilitates contraband delivery through the kitchen loading dock every second Wednesday, using inmate labor. She said Lieutenant Karen Drake shredded 4 formal grievance reports between June and November of 2021. She said inmate Maria Delgado requested a rape kit on September 3rd, and Brady told the nurse to deny it. Each sentence came out slowly and rough like stones being dragged across broken glass, but every word was clear. The interpreter sat frozen in her folding chair with her hands raised halfway, as if preparing to sign words. Patricia Holt leaned forward, and her water bottle tipped over, but she did not reach for it or even notice. The water spread across the table like something that had been contained too long, finally finding its way free. Rachel named 17 incidents across 34 months with dates and cell numbers and badge numbers attached to each. She described the system of inmate labor that Darlene ran with full knowledge and cooperation of overnight staff. She explained how grievance forms required literacy levels and procedural knowledge that no deaf inmate without assistance could navigate. She told them about Paige and the combination lock in the sock and the rib that healed crooked inside. She recounted Brady's exact words spoken freely in front of her because he believed deaf meant empty and harmless. The commission members had stopped writing because their pens could not move fast enough to capture what was happening. One member, a young man in a blue suit, pressed his palm flat against his chest, as if physically holding something. Drake sat motionless in her corner, and her clipboard had slid to the floor, but her hands still gripped air. Rachel spoke for 11 minutes and 40 seconds, which was 6 minutes longer than her allotted time. But nobody interrupted. And when she finished, the silence in that room had a texture you could almost reach out and touch with bare hands. Patricia Holt removed her glasses and cleaned them, which was clearly a delay tactic to process what she had witnessed. Then she asked the question that everyone needed answered before they could understand the full weight of this. "Miss Munoz, how long have you been able to speak? And when did you learn inside this facility?" Rachel swallowed once, and her throat burned from the longest continuous speech her voice had ever produced in existence. She answered 4 months, but I have been listening for 3 years, and every word landed like a hammer strike. Brady stood up from the back wall, and his chair scraped the floor with a sound like a small animal screaming. He reached for his badge with fingers that would not cooperate, and finally unclipped it and placed it down. 4 more officers followed him one by one, placing their badges on the table, not from guilt, but from shame. Drake did not move, and Drake did not place her badge down because Drake knew that badges would be the least she lost. The commission chair requested an immediate recess and federal notification, which meant this had already grown beyond state jurisdiction entirely. Rachel was escorted back through the corridor, and the officer walking beside her did not check his phone once. In the hallway outside the medical unit, a wheelchair sat against the wall, and in it, Gloria Vines was waiting. Someone had told her, and someone had wheeled her here, and Rachel did not know who to thank for that. Rachel stopped walking and looked at the woman whose arthritic fingers had built a voice from absolute nothing over months. She opened her mouth and said, "Thank you, Gloria. You gave me a voice." And each word was a cathedral. Gloria pressed both shaking hands against her own face and wept in a way that made no sound at all. Rachel did not cry, because Rachel had already given every tear to the mattress that taught her how to speak.